Imagine opening your email to find years of history deleted. Only a single email remains. A ransomware request for $2 million. You think to yourself, how could this happen to me? You see, there's two types of companies. Those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. The weight of responsibility comes crashing down on you. It's the sort of responsibility you feel when your family is craving a delicious pizza. You finally open the box only to find the most cringe-worthy topping that you mistakenly ordered. Join Pineapple on Pizza podcast as John and George, along with guest executives, discuss the most common and craziest cybersecurity risks, followed by actionable tips and strategies that can be implemented to protect your cyber risk pie. Pineapple on Pizza is hosted by Omnistruck.
Welcome to another episode of Pineapple on Pizza. Today we have this amazing guest who happens to be a semi-professional handyman. He's a shooting range marksman, a skyscraper Spider-Man, but he also is the president at Atlas Unmanned Solutions. We have Ralph Gonzalez.
Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Ralph, we're going to start off hot and heavy here. So, and here's our question. If cyber risk was a pizza and the frameworks are a crust, what's the riskiest topping you've seen, and what topping would you equate that to?
So, cyber, again, we had this little banter beforehand. I'm not an engineer. I just have, real world experience with a little bit of cyber, mostly counter-drone stuff. But from the little that I've seen, the hardening of cyber networks from the top down, meaning physically, being able to see through a window, getting a signal from a parking lot, from a roof, stuff like that. That's where I've experienced the most risk. Now, if I had to equate that to something on a pizza, being, born and bred New Yorker my entire life until recently, moved out of state, pizza is something we take very seriously, So, we don't really mess around too much with the toppings. The one thing I will say, and maybe you kind of like topping, but it's the way you eat it, right? So you never eat it with a fork and knife. So take care of certain things. You have to do it a certain type of way, just like you have to eat pizza a certain type of way. We had the misfortune of this mayor who one time took a fork and knife to a pizza in public. That knife was actually put as evidence in an evidence bag and it's still hands in that restaurant as evidence of what not to do. Literally, it's a police department evidence bag. And, I'm not going to use certain terms to describe the guy, but he wasn't, people weren't a big fan of him. That was just one of the many things we didn't like about him. But, never eat pizza with a fork and knife.
So it's interesting. We actually have a pizza place here in San Diego. So all the way across the United States, right? That flies in their water from New York to make their dough. So yeah. It's an important ingredient, and definitely,
very much so
makes that pizza the way that it is.
Yeah, that's great. The one on Coronado Island, isn't it, John? Yeah.
It is, yeah. I think they're opening a couple of different locations. But
if you guys are ever in New York, the place is called Goodfellas. It's out of Staten Island, and literally you'll see the fork with a picture of the guy
of the crime.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Well, so tell me this. So as your role as president of your company, what keeps you up at night?
Regulations. That's the one thing that really bothers me, regulations, because right now we deal primarily with airborne airspace threats, something that we've seen evolving over the last 10 years constantly, and now it's being driven by the war in Ukraine and other conflicts. So the solutions for a lot of these issues are available. And when I say solutions, I mean the technology. But because the legal framework that controls both signals, both the aircraft flying in the sky, all this other stuff, is technically against almost every vendor on how to resolve this issue. Not just the vendor, but also the clients, meaning law enforcement, meaning prisons, critical infrastructure. Everything is against them. and everything favors the pilot. Now, let me caveat that. I'm a big fan of pilots and hobbyists and people flying drones. Most people do it the right way, but the same rules that protect them also protect the bad guy, and that's the one thing that kind of bothers me.
And maybe weather balloons, as they call them, right?
That too, yeah. the next big weather balloon. That's
Yeah. All right. Well, so meeting those regulatory requirements. So tell me more about that. I know that we've talked to a few drone people, and a lot of them are dealing with FAA kind of regulations. It sounds, and those same ones, as you said, protect the hobbyists as well as some of the professionals. And of course, if somebody's flying, especially if it's manned, not unmanned, but if you've got a manned drone or something, you definitely want to bring it down in a hard way, right? So what are some of those other regulatory requirements that you really that you struggle with?
So some of the, just like cell phones, just like a lot of things that go over the airways, the signals that control a drone between the control station and the drone itself or the UAV. All are controlled through FCC regulations, and the fact that they are controlled, that those signals are managed by the FCC, they have to meet certain standards. The same thing goes for anything that interrupts that signal, right? We can't interrupt the signal without proper authorization from the FCC and a few other people, unless your particular agencies are allowed to do such a thing under certain standards. The fact that, security director for a stadium full of people during a football game can't say, hey, there's a drone coming, we should push it further out. That I don't think that's right. I think that certain people should have, with the right training, with the right licensing, with the right authorization, have the ability to protect their facilities, their communities, their critical infrastructure, their manned aircraft, right? It's mind-blowing to me that airports can't do this. When you have jets full of people flying back and forth, landing every 60 seconds, and you have something with the lithium battery the size of a brick flying close to an engine. If you've never seen a lithium battery catch fire, it's a scary thing, especially when you try to put the fire out, and regardless of what you do, it just won't go out. So these are the things that concern me.
Well, what can be done in these situations, like the lithium battery situation? And what do you think should be done, or what can be done to address that in regulation, if anything at all?
So right now, only certain in the United States, only certain agencies have the authority to mitigate the flight of a drone. Mitigate meaning push it out further out, jam its signal, take over its signal, that type of stuff. Of those agencies, there's maybe a few thousand people that work for those agencies, and you can't expect those people to be responsible for every single large event in the United States, every critical infrastructure, that could be harmed by one of these things. It's just not fair to those agencies. And it also says something about how much the federal government believes in local entities. How much do they believe in local law enforcement to state law enforcement? Why aren't you giving them the authority to protect themselves from this threat? And I say threat in a way, I'm former law enforcement, so I see everything as a potential hazard, and that's what we got paid for, right? You kind of assess how this can have an impact negatively on whatever it is that you're trying to protect. So to see a large venue, being improperly protected, I should, because you can detect it, right? The law says, hey, you can detect the signal, but that's all you can do. As long as you don't go into the signal, you're okay. I equate it to a highway, right? You can look at the cars, you can say, hey, that's a Ford, that's a Chevy, but what you can't do is go inside the car and see what the driver's doing. That's where you start breaking the rules. So a lot of technology has evolved to the point where it can make out the make and model based on the signature of the signal without having to go into the signal. Once you go into the signal, the world changes. But if you could go into the signal and you can feed it new directions, so what we call a render safe location. Hey, I want you to go land in that parking lot, away from everybody else. Then we can take a better look at you And if you didn't do anything wrong, we'll give you back to your owner. We'll give the owner a slap on the wrist. That's what should be happening now. And the federal government should say, to large venues, to specially trained task force, to whoever it is that needs to do it, you now have the authority to protect your own backyard. And that's what I would like to see one day.
Yeah, there's definitely a parallel there in what essentially is the concept of an internet delivered world. So, and obviously the idea of cyber attacks, comparatively, I think a lot of people think cyber attack that it's on my computer and it's online, but attacks can happen in many. They come in many flavors, right? Like pizza. So it can be a radio-based attack. So like we've seen security professionals that do what we call signal interference and deterrence, and doing those kinds of, call them penetration tests on different kinds of hardware as well that's using radio signals. So you'd be surprised how much alignment there is in what essentially is the kind of certification of certain products, and or at large, the every police department does have the ability to get you in touch with a cyber crime task force in their area, but they don't necessarily have, and I speak at a lot of what we call digital forensics conferences. I have in the past anyway. And, it's about a third of the folks there are they're LE, they're law enforcement, right? And so they talk about what essentially are drones. That's one of the topics that the technical teams that are responsible for the security of, or the kind of the cybersecurity side of the house, if they're involved. But most of their involvement is very limited to like the local school, and there's a kid that's hacking, and the Safe Schools initiative at that school, right? But their hands are tied otherwise, right? So because they don't have the resources, they don't have the people, and so I see a parallel there.
Yeah, I mean, some people feel that certain agencies don't want to give up the authorities and stuff like that. I don't think that's true. I've worked with a lot of different agencies, and so these guys are overworked, and I think most of them would be happy to give up some of the responsibility. It's like, hey, no problem. I can spend a weekend with my family, because I don't have to work this football game or this large event. No problem. Take it over, as long as you have the proper training, as long as you have the proper equipment, and you have the legal authority to use it. Right? If the laws change, then everybody should have a chance at it. It's one of these things that 8-9 years ago we saw growing. We were tracking the growth of the drone market, and we knew it was going to hit. And the numbers that we saw then have been blown out of the water now, because the technology keeps getting easier to use, cheaper, a lot cooler. The pictures, these fantastic cameras and these things, these on-the-move tracking programs where you can go running and the thing was following you behind you. And the thing is, now it's going to get even more popular, because you see the videos online of what's happening overseas in the war. That same stuff was happening during the conflict with ISIS, but we weren't getting a lot of video feeds on that, at least not open source stuff. But now you click on, you go on LinkedIn, you go on certain sites on YouTube, and you see how these things are just deadly accurate. So what is that going to do, right? It might inspire somebody to, kind of try it themselves. So why not protect people? Why not give the authority to local law enforcement, to state officials, to security, directors? It doesn't always have to be a cop. It could just be somebody who's trained to that level. Here, protect this infrastructure, because you know what? If this power grid goes down, X amount of states are going to go dark. So, and if you haven't lived through a blackout, it's an interesting event. So, that's what we don't want to see happen.
So Ralph, tell us what are you doing about it? I mean, you run Atlas Unmanned Solutions. So tell us what's the solution that you developed to help with this?
Our solutions are, for the most part, third-party solutions. And when it comes to technology, we develop some stuff in-house. We develop different ways of deploying solutions. But if there's a smarter person working on a problem set, let them figure it out, and we can figure out how to implement it to our clients. I've been doing this now on the private side for a couple of years. I've done it for public sector for almost 10 years. And everybody has a different need. And that's why I like being equipment agnostic, because everybody has a different, what works out in the desert for the military doesn't always work in an urban canyon, doesn't always work in an area surrounded by water, in a place where you have millions of cell phones pinging at the same time. So we have to try to figure that out and match the client to the right solution. The one thing we provide that's unique to us is our training. All our training is based on real world experience, almost a decade of counterterrorism work. And we also cater that specifically to the client, meaning that, if you're a power grid, this is what we can train you with. If you're a task force, meaning different agencies coming together, we can train you how to work together, how to set up an operation, how to set up equipment, how to properly do an assessment for equipment deployment, and also a threat assessment on a location, how to make an arrest based on this, right? Because this is new. This is a new type of threat. So how do we make an arrest with that? I made a lot of arrests when it comes to this stuff. So you have to know how to, exploit the data on the drone, how to handle the drone, how to approach an individual legally, what questions you can ask to get more information from them. So, I'm very grateful that I was part of a great team. And we, and throughout the, years of doing this, we kind of came up with this really cool ConOps that we were able to share with other agencies. But now as a private entity, as a private business, I can train, as long as they're friendly to the US government, and not looking to do any harm, we can train them on this.
No, that's excellent. So how are things now? I mean, so you're training these people and you're giving this ability to a number of different agencies or different people. It sounds like also private businesses as well, or is it strictly more for law enforcement? Or
well, we do private businesses, but when we say private, it's primarily security personnel. So I don't like putting the onus on just law enforcement. I think if you run a stadium, if you run a large venue, your personnel should be trained to a certain level as well. So a lot of times when it comes to training, we snub our noses to security companies. But I don't think that's fair. I think they deserve just as much training as everybody else, because they're going to be your first line of defense, right? They're the guys who call the cops. Cops are number two. As a former law enforcement, we like to say first. No, it's not true. The person who calls 911 is the first person. And if we can train them up to a certain level, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So that's why I like training security personnel as well.
Excellent. So I'm going to kind of change things up here, but so tell us, what do you see for the future of that? I mean, what excites you about the future, and how that's going to go long term?
So the future is, I think we're going to be kept busy. Airspace security, is a new realm of security. When I was a law enforcement trainer for many years, and we trained people on how to detect explosives, how to detect car bombs, everything from residue on somebody's hands, looking for explosive trace. We did all this stuff, and we would still see drone intrusions, airspace intrusions. There would be what was called a temporary flight restriction, TFR, in place, and the drones would fly right into that. 90% of 95% of the time, it was somebody who just didn't know that we're doing something wrong. But every once in a while, somebody who was doing it on purpose. Somebody who wanted to take a picture of, Serena Williams during the U.S. Open, or somebody who wanted to take a picture of a Yankees game. Not knowing that at any time that signal could be lost, by no fault of their own, and that thing would drop out of the sky. I've been hit by a drone, in the back of the head once. It's not fun. It's part of our R&D. I got smacked in the head with something, but I've seen people lose eyes. I've seen somebody die from this. Lost the top of it. Literally lost the top of their head. It was an unfortunate accident where somebody got too close to their own RC helicopter, and it was a terrible thing. But a lot of people look at these things as toys, and they're not. Number one, they're flying computers. That's number one. These things are just as smart as a cell phone. Number two, lithium batteries. Number three, those RPMs, sometimes they have carbon fiber blades. You're going to lose a finger. You're going to lose whatever part of the body that hits. You're not getting back.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
like a
why,
flying table saw to some degree, right?
absolutely. We used to do all types of experiments, and we used to time down the tables to see what the down blast was, and every paper in the room would go flying. So these things are extremely dangerous if handled improperly. Again, not that I want to see anybody lose their right to use them. I just would like to see more control on who's buying them. Meaning that you should. Right now, the process is with the FAA. You buy it, then you have to register it, which is backwards to me. It's like when you buy a car, you have to show proof that you have a license before you can register it, and then you get to take possession of the car or whatever it is that you need to do. But the way it works now is you buy it, then you register it, and you're asked to take a certain test, to make sure that you operate safely. These are all post-purchase. It should be the other way around. I'll tell you a horrible story. I get a call from a buddy of mine. This is when I was still doing law enforcement. And he says to me, hey, there's a store in Times Square that's selling a agricultural sprayer. I was like, why in Times Square? Why is somebody selling this? So, I go, regular street clothes. I walk in there and say, hey, I'm looking to buy an agricultural sprayer. The guy looks at me like, for what? I was like, well, I grow grapes. I'm a winemaker. I don't look like a winemaker. The guy's exact words to me was, I don't care what you're going to use it for. If you give me 15 grand, you can walk out of it with today. And it was sitting right there. This thing holds 5 gallons of water. Super easy. He's like, I'll show you how to use it. He pulls out a tablet. Here are your waypoints. Just tap on the tablet where you want it to go, hit send, and it goes off on its own. Why is this being sold right there in Times Square? Actually 3 blocks north of Times Square. So, these are the things that concern me because, they're out there. Some people may want to do harm with them. Some people just may not know how dangerous these things are and fly them irresponsibly. Or, somebody just has a really bad intention. These are the people that we should really be scared of.
Sure.
But, the technology is out there. The con ops are out there. You just have to learn what not to do if you're an agency, how your guys should be responding. And, number one is detection. Let's figure out a way to detect these things so we at least have a warning when these things are being turned on. And number two is, mitigation of some sort. But again, that's most 99% of the people out there won't be able to do it until the laws are changed.
Well, it's kind of like an airplane's, collision detection system. It's always on, right? But in this case, it's announcing itself. The drone is saying, here I am, that way. Right. Those that are trained and know how to deal with those situations can intercept. I agree with you. I think that there's on the prior point that there needs to be more training and more capabilities and more. Well, let's just call it what it is. The legal side, right, of allowing regional first responders to deal with these situations. And I think that's always been the concern, I think, in many areas of regulation. It's not just drones. So yeah, I see that too. It's really fascinating to hear that some of these, we'll just call them real applications, but also these situations, where people can get their hands on these assets and do whatever they please, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Asset.
And again, always distinguishing from, the hobbyists who are fantastic at policing themselves. I've been to a couple of flying fields with some AMA guys. The AMA, they're the biggest one out there. And they're fantastic, right? Safety officers, taped off lanes, even signals to everybody, everybody knows what frequency you're flying on. So they do it great. If everybody did it that way, we wouldn't have to worry about it. But the fact is that now, because this technology is so popular, little Timmy gets one of these for Christmas. And, Timmy lives outside of an airport, down in Howard Beach in Queens. Now he puts it up 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet in the flight path of an incoming Airbus or something. These are the things that we need to concern ourselves with. Some of the manufacturers are setting up their own geofences into their programs, into their apps and all that other stuff. but these things are very easily overcome. Sometimes you just go into the settings and turn off, or I'll ask you, hey, you're not supposed to fly here. Do you really want to fly here? And, oh yeah, I do want to fly here. So now I go, and it's not enough. I think we should have a defense mechanism available for law enforcement, not just detection. It should be other things that they should be able to do to prevent a catastrophic incident from occurring. Even if it's just, this thing falling out of the sky and, hitting somebody. There was an incident a few years ago where somebody said, hey, there's a drone up in the sky, and this police officer looked up to see where it was, and it landed right in her face. And these are the things that we want to prevent. Those are my 2 cents.
Well, you know what? I know there's a lot of information out there online, but I imagine that there's probably events that you might attend. Can you share with us some of those events, whether it's trade shows or conferences? I mean, I'm aware that there's an event coming up, IWCE in Las Vegas, which is a kind of communications of what essentially are different kinds of technologies, including drone technologies. And so I know that there's we would call them not maybe direct drone events, but so tell us, what are some
related? Yeah, I think, listen, if I had to suggest anything to anybody, I would say an AMA conference. If you're going to be a pilot, join your local AMA. And again, maybe it is an endorsement, but it isn't. I have no direct relationship with these guys. I just know they do it so well. Hey, hang out with those guys. There's a few other conferences out there, AUBSI. There's a handful of them, but it's mostly guys just peddling technology, different, new, and, they do talk about, the change of laws and all this other stuff. But in the counter drone world, there's very few stuff out there unless you're, military or law enforcement or any of that stuff, or you're a vendor of some sort. We are hosting a demo day for different technology vendors. It's going to be April 17th at Emerging Technology Institute, ETI, in North Carolina. So if anybody wants to go learn about, drone detections, mitigation stuff, they can join us there for a day. We're also going to have a really interesting panel discussion where it's, some DoD guys and some infrastructure guys, critical infrastructure, people with the same concerns. And we're going to discuss about, what rules need to be changed, what rules really don't have any effect on what we're currently trying to achieve. And the goal of everything we do is just, security of the skies. There's another event that I'll be attending. It's with the ACI, International Council of Airports. But, we're going to be speaking about similar concerns in and around airports. How do we keep the traffic controlled by the tower and not, people are just taking it upon themselves to fly in your airspace when you're landing and taking off aircrafts constantly. So, these are concerns that are real.
I know that there's some fabulous events in the tech community, and there's fabulous business events, that regulatory events, even science and research events, and it just seems that, there's always folks attending certain events, but sometimes they don't cross over, depending upon, what their focus is, right? You have to focus on what you're focusing on. So we really appreciate you sharing these other events. I haven't heard of any of these, at least off the top of my head. I think maybe the AMA I've heard of. So really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much.
I mean, we have also our own, another event that we're hosting is a training event in same location, ETI in North Carolina. It's a training range. It's a fantastic facility, and we're going to have a 3-day training for law enforcement, for security personnel, for DoD personnel, anybody who's in the business of securing, not just physically securing an area, but also also cyber securing of the airspace. And so that's a 3-day training, again, nuts to bolts, what exactly is a UAS or a drone, all the way through how to process an arrest, how to deal with the evidence, how to set up detection technology. And we'll talk about mitigation technology, but we don't have the authority to use it, so we'll just talk about it and show some examples of it without having to turn anything on. So that's the type of stuff that we're doing.
Can you share with us where in North Carolina this is? Which city?
Red Springs. It's the Emerging Technology Institute in Red Springs, North Carolina, ETI.
Okay. One of our folks is may be close to that area, so we'll let him know. But I was also going to ask, what were the dates on that again?
So the demo day is the 17th. So that's that Monday, so we'll have a little demo day with different type of technologies, and we'll have that roundtable discussion. And then the following 3 days will be all training. Just like to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, DroneSec, which is an open source, drone incident reporting system, but phenomenal system globally. We have Echodyne, who is a drone detection radar. Again, fantastic product. And we have Fly Motion out of Tampa, kind of an everything shop that has to do with drones, specifically this is for first responders, for DoD. These guys do it all, training, equipment, fantastic shop. So all three of the sponsors are helping us set this up with ETI. ETI, another fantastic location. These guys do a lot of community work, bringing STEM to the local schools, and it's funny because they do the STEM work with the schools, and then they do the military stuff with Fort Bragg. So it's a real, it's kind of a very wide spectrum there of what they do, but fantastic organization, great training range. So we're going to have a lot of fun with them.
It sounds exciting, and I know that we have. I think just about everybody has friends or family that's involved in drones, or somebody that's a fan at least. And it is fascinating to see the business side of things, and at least in our experience. So we've had the great fortune of being able to work with companies that are in the drone, let's call it in the drone industry, whether they're making the drones or if they're servicing or what have you. And just the number of applications that I can think of for every time that we meet with somebody that does drones, so to speak, or is in the industry, there just seems like I learn about something new, some new way, a new application that's evolving. So yeah, I think I agree with you that the future is going to be incredible. But the regulations, I think we're similar in that regulations keep us up at night as well. And how they're written, sometimes not well, and the changes that are expected in order to have the right outcomes, so we can keep people safe, and that's not just online, that's physically as well. So we hear you, we hear you, and we agree. So. But I really appreciate you taking the time with us. I know that we have we tend to get into some interesting or deeper discussions on a lot of different topics. But there's also are there any books that you might recommend that you've read as well, for those that are bookworms out there?
There's a few of them out there. Bard College put something out, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. So Bard had this unmanned systems program, and I think it died right before COVID, and never made it back. But they did put some publications out there which were fantastic. If you just want to learn the science, the terminology and all that stuff, DHS S&T New Steel, the National Urban Science and Technology Laboratory out of New York, they published this fantastic handbook. So if you're new to this, find that handbook online. I worked with those guys extensively. Big shout out to them, to Alice Hong, director over there, and her team. And they put out this great handbook and everything you need to know. It might be a little outdated, but nothing that's going to keep you from knowing the business. But all the science is in there, all the technology, all the different types of technology, and I believe it also touched on some of the regulations.
So Ralph, how did you get here? I mean, how does somebody become a drone expert and a training expert to tell people how this is? And I mean, obviously you came from law enforcement, but I mean, tell us a little more about yourself.
So I don't like the word expert. I'm always very wary when somebody says that they're an expert, because, somebody's going to put you to the test. So, I'm a guy who knows a little bit about this stuff. So I did 20 years with the NYPD. Most of that time I did under counterterrorism, and I belong to a very special unit where our job was to test and evaluate different types of technology. Meaning, if there was a need for a technology, because we saw that there was a potential danger out there, either we saw it overseas or we saw it domestically, if it had to do with technology or something we could mitigate with technology, we would work with vendors, work with different agencies, and try to incorporate that technology or even design the technology into our everyday ConOps, right? Our concepts of operation. When we started seeing the use of weaponized drones overseas, we were like, well, this is something we need to concern ourselves with, because obviously I can buy a drone here. So let's see, what we can do about it. And we started working with Department of Defense, some of their research laboratories, ARDIC up in Picatinny Arsenal was one, Army's Futures Commands, all these great laboratories, assigned to the Army and some of them to DHS, that there were similar jobs, right? Look at what the problem is and try to figure out technology, a way that we use technology to mitigate it. Let's just call it that. So I was turned on to the counter drone technology by a buddy of mine out of DC, and I'll tell you guys the story. Right, I walk into my boss's office, and I'm also a part-time professor, so I know how to put that together, like slide decks real quick. Nobody wants to read reports, so I put together a slide deck, and I go to my boss. I was like, we need to be looking at this. He's like, Ralph, we have too much going on right now. This is around 2012, around that, ISIS was starting to get spun up and we were dealing with that stuff. So he's like, don't bring me any new problems. I was like, come on, this is important, So he literally says, get the F out of my office and go back to work. So fast forward like a month, we get an intel report of somebody put a gun on a drone. And we're like, all right, this is weird. So I walk past a high-ranking officer. He's like, look at this. What is this? I've never seen this before. I was like, let me mind my business. I go do what I got to do, get my cup of coffee. On my way back to my office, they're still talking about it. And I go, listen, boss, if you don't mind my interruption. He's like, I have some information on this. He's like, well, what do you got? Like you're the new guy here. What do you know about this? I was like, well, I have a slide deck.
Not before.
So 5 minutes later, I'm setting up in the chief's office and I'm showing the slide deck, and their minds are just completely blown. Because I have videos, I have, case studies, I have all this other stuff. A week later, I'm doing this in front of a 3-star chief at headquarters. Now, most time when you hear the word chief, it's a cop. No, we're talking about the chief of counterterrorism for the NYPD. They make movies about these guys. So, I show it to him. He turns around. He goes like, what are you guys doing about this? I was like, well, boss, there's certain things we can do, but we don't have the legal authority, but I can find something. He's like, go, and from that day on, I led the project, and, we became kind of the model for a lot of agencies, because even some federal agencies weren't dealing with this problem set. So we were training them on how to do it, and then I did that till 2011 when it was my time to punch out, and and just kind of stayed in the same lane, but now I just do it privately.
And it sounds like you also incorporated that professor and the training and all the education that you've done both for yourself and everybody else. It seems like you've incorporated that very well into your new business. So that's great to hear. I
try. It's when you love what you do, it's not work, and like I said, it was a lot of fun doing, especially in New York City, climbing skyscrapers and, setting up antennas and detectors all over the place. I got to see a part of the city a lot of people don't see. We look up, but very few people get to look down. So.
What's the most amazing thing that you saw? And out of all of those climbs that you did, the one that was like, wow, I'm never going to forget this. Anything come to mind?
Yeah. My hatred for hawks. So Yeah, you know, at first, you know, you see a hawk, you're like, oh my God, it's cute, you know, it's so beautiful, it's so majestic. And then when this thing sweeps down at you, you're
Yeah.
like, every word in your mouth turns completely to a curse word. And now you have to like watch yourself because these things are so aggressive, you know, and you're up there, you're like, listen, I'm not here to mess with your babies. So, you know, just do your stuff and I'll do mine and but no, these
Oh,
things do
of
not
course.
want anything near their nest. You know, we started going up with a third guy. And you know, the third guy's job was only to
Just
look
for
at
hawk control.
absolutely.
Sweep the hawk.
Yeah, that's it. You know, and there was one real nasty one, and he was on 7th Avenue. Uh, and I guess he knew when we were coming because he would always leave like a dead carcass just sitting there. We'd go back a week to check on the system, and there'd be a new carcass. And he would never eat the heart. It was weird. He would just leave it there for us, the head and the heart. And it was just, listen, I've worked in some of the worst neighborhoods in New York City as a beat cop. Nothing scared me more than a hawk. Those things are terrible, terrible.
Wow.
Yeah,
You know, us folks walking on the ground in the city, right, you know, like, which I've done many times, you know, the concern always is, you know, don't look up, right?
yeah,
You know, the pigeons, right? Or we call them rats with wings
yeah,
sometimes. And so that's the concern on the ground is, you know, getting pooped on by a bird. But you know, you know, you don't think about that. Well, I actually used to think, man, I just, you know, once you're in the building, you got nothing to worry about, right? So if I could, you know, go up on the rooftop, it would be wonderful. And they
yeah,
never would have thought, well, there might be an aggressive, you know,
yeah. There was one
hawk
place
setting a nest.
we went to one place where there was a bald eagle nesting,
Oh,
and you know,
Wow.
and the wingspan on this thing, it looked like a dinosaur. So the person we were walking through the facility, you know, the person responsible for the facility was like, well, you could use there. I was like, dude, are you out of your mind? I was like, you go first, you wake it up, you tell it to move, and then maybe I'll go up there. But you know, when this thing opened his wings, it looked like an airplane landing, you know. I was like, no, 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 thank you. So you gotta learn how to respect nature.
That's for sure.
so Ralph, here's a question for you. If you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice, what would that advice be?
You know, it's funny because, you know, I think you guys might agree with this, but I tell everybody, learn cybersecurity. Even if you're not going to do it, just learn cybersecurity. You know, because cybersecurity encompasses the language that systems use to speak to each other. You know, you guys tell me if I'm wrong or right. You know, but that's as far as I got with this stuff. And having to bring in somebody else who speaks that language is number one, costly and it's time consuming. So if I knew at least that much of that part of the business, you know, it would make things a little bit easier for me. And you know, if I was looking for a job, I could be more marketable. But yeah, you have to know how things work. And you know, we were talking about earlier about, you know, being a handyman around the house. The reason I know this is because, you know, my dad said never pay for a mechanic if you could do it for yourself. So I learned how to fix cars. I learned how to fix stuff around the house. It's the same concept now when it comes to the Internet of Things. You know, you have to know how these things talk to each other, the language they use, and you know, when they break, how do you fix it? How do you keep somebody from breaking it for you? You know, so I think cybersecurity, and again, you guys know more than I do about this. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the way to go. You know, at least have that knowledge base.
That and when the Wi-Fi goes down, how you fix it so that your kids don't come screaming at you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, they don't know I turned it off on my phone. You know, when they're not going to bed, I just turn off their devices on my phone and they lose their mind. I hear the TV coming on and off, like unplugging it, trying to troubleshoot it. And I'm sitting there laughing.
Well, great, Ralph. So how can people find you? Tell us where we can locate you and get in
So,
touch.
even though I hate social media, I spend most of my day with LinkedIn on. So, you know, LinkedIn is definitely the best way to find me. You know, my webpage is atlasunmanned.com, but nobody goes to web pages anymore. You know, LinkedIn is definitely the way to communicate and to find people, to find services. So that's usually the best way. My email is simple, R Gonzalez with a Z at the end, atlasunmanned.com.
Yeah,
Great.
gotcha. Yeah, I can I can understand the concept of websites. That's maybe websites will go the way of the fax machine. Who knows? But yes, the cybersecurity side is definitely something that. Did you know that industry has been around for 52 years? Cybersecurity.
I didn't know it was that long, but I know it's been around for a while. My older siblings are all in that side of the business, and they've been doing it since the 80s. So, I know it's been around for a while. But it's not going anywhere. It's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So having that knowledge base, even if it's not directly what you do, it's just going to help you, because I sit in meetings all the time where, once they go into the cyber side of the technology, I sit there and I take notes, because every term that I hear, I write down. I need to know what that is for the next meeting. Or, I'm not ashamed of saying, hey, what does that mean? But I can't do it every 5 seconds, right? They're going to tell me to leave. So having that knowledge base, I think, is very, very important.
All right, Ralph, thank you very much for your time and telling us how you're training our law enforcement and helping set those perimeters and training people how to set those perimeters. I also enjoyed the stories that you told us about climbing up and watching out for the birds, and I think I definitely experienced some of that myself. But your amateur Spider-Man things and handyman. I mean, so I'm gonna have to call you for some help, and just bug you with things.
Whatever you need.
But thank you very much. To our audience, thank you for listening. If you've learned something today or you laughed, please share this podcast with somebody else and help us get the word out there. There it is. It's been another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza with your hosts, John and George. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining.
Next time, everybody. Thanks, Ralph.
Pleasure.
Thank you all for joining another great episode of Pineapple on Pizza. You can find show notes, links, and resources by visiting omnistruct.com/blog. And a huge thank you to all who are preventatively protecting organizations from cyber threats.